Welcome to WikiPodcast. Today we're diving deep into sadness, that feeling we all know, a truly fundamental part of the human experience. We'll be looking at what it is, drawing on information like you might find on Wikipedia, and really digging into why it plays such a crucial role in our lives.
That's right. Sadness often gets seen as something negative, something we want to get rid of as quickly as possible. But our goal today is to explore its deeper meaning, its purpose, and maybe even discover some surprising ways it actually, brings us together.
Yeah, moving beyond just a simple definition.
Exactly, to really appreciate the richness of this emotion.
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. When we talk about sadness, what are we actually feeling? What's the core of it?
Well, at its heart, sadness is a form of emotional pain. It involves feelings of disadvantage, loss, disappointment. A sense of despair or helplessness often comes with it.
And how does it look on the outside?
You might notice someone becoming quieter, maybe less energetic, or they might tend to withdraw from others. It's a kind of pulling inward.
And it can be more than just a passing feeling, right? I mean, it connects to more serious states, too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, intense and prolonged sadness can be a feature of conditions like major depressive disorder and persistent depressive disorder. These are, more severe forms that often need clinical attention.
Right.
And of course, crying is a very common and visible expression of sadness. Interestingly, sadness is considered one of the 6 basic emotions identified by psychologist Paul Ekman.
Oh, right. Along with happiness, anger.
Exactly. Happiness, anger, surprise, fear, and disgust. These are emotions believed to be universally recognized across cultures.
So it's really built into our emotional operating system, you could say.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, thinking about when we first encounter this feeling, our sources talk quite a bit about sadness in childhood.
Yes, childhood is a really key time for experiencing sadness. It's often linked to the early stages of becoming independent, separating from our primary caregivers.
Those first steps away from mom, for instance.
Precisely. Even small steps towards independence can involve experiencing little losses, like maybe not having a parent's immediate attention or comfort right when you want it, learning to cope with those small separations.
That makes sense, those first little pangs of separation. And it sounds like how families respond to a child's sadness can really shape their whole understanding of emotions later on.
Absolutely critical. The psychiatrist Robin Skinner suggested that if a family has a sort of rule, maybe unwritten, that sadness is not allowed. Well, that can have long-term effects.
What kind of effects?
He theorized that suppressing sadness can lead to a kind of emotional shallowness, or even paradoxically to manic behaviors, almost as a way of, desperately avoiding those deeper, sadder feelings.
Wow, that's quite a connection. So constantly pushing away sadness might stop us from developing real emotional depth.
That's the idea. Makes you wonder. So the key then is to actually acknowledge a child's sadness, not just try to brush it aside or cheer them up immediately.
Exactly. Child development experts like T. Berry Brazelton and Selma Freyberg really emphasize this, respecting a child's sadness.
Not just distracting them.
Right. They argued that constantly trying to make a child happy can actually teach them that their sad feelings aren't valid or aren't acceptable. Freyberg even spoke about respecting a child's right to grieve a loss fully, no matter how small it might seem to us as adults.
So letting them feel it actually helps them learn and grow emotionally.
Yes. And the sources even touch on the idea that the ability to feel sadness can be a positive development, like an achievement.
Exactly. The psychoanalyst Margaret Mahler saw the capacity to experience sadness as an emotional achievement, a sign of healthy psychological development, rather than just, avoiding difficult feelings through constant activity or distraction.
That's a different way of looking at it.
And the pediatrician and psychoanalyst D.W. Winnicott had this fascinating idea. He suggested that the sad cries of a child, that expression of deep feeling, might even be a foundational experience for appreciating and maybe even creating music later in life.
Wow. From a baby's cry to Beethoven, potentially.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thought.
It's a powerful connection, isn't it, between expressing deep emotion early on and developing maybe an artistic sensibility.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about what happens inside our heads. What's going on in the brain when we feel sad? The neuroscience part.
Yeah, this is a really active area of research. Studies using PET scans have shown that when people think about sad things or remember sad events, there's increased activity in several brain regions.
Okay.
These include areas in the middle and back of the temporal cortex, parts of the cerebellum, like the lateral cerebellum and the cerebellar vermis, and also the midbrain, putamen, and caudate nucleus.
So it's not just one single sad spot lighting up.
No, definitely not. It's a network. Other research, for instance, where sadness was induced, maybe by showing sad movie clips,
Yeah.
found increased activity in areas like the bilateral inferior and orbitofrontal cortex. These are heavily involved in processing emotions, as well as parts of the prefrontal cortex, specifically an area called Brodmann's Area 9, which seems to play a role in emotional regulation.
Yep.
And the thalamus, which is like a relay center for sensory and motor signals, and areas in the front part of the temporal lobes were also more active. It really shows sadness engages a complex interplay of different brain regions.
It really highlights that sadness is a whole brain experience, doesn't it? Not just, a thought or a mood floating around.
Exactly. It's deeply physiological.
So why do we even have this emotion? What's its purpose, evolutionarily speaking? The function of sadness.
Well, from a functional perspective, emotions generally evolve to help us respond effectively to different situations, right? Sadness is believed to have two main functions, particularly when it comes to dealing with loss or significant negative events.
Okay, tell me about those.
So firstly, sadness can trigger important cognitive changes. When we're sad about a loss, it can actually help us to pause and reevaluate our goals, our beliefs, maybe restructure how we see things.
How does that work?
Well, some studies have even shown that when feeling sad, people can be less influenced by their pre-existing biases or assumptions, what psychologists call schemas.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, even in areas like political ideology influencing decisions. Sadness might allow for a slightly more objective, or at least a different perspective for a time.
So it can help us see things a bit more clearly, maybe, when we're not clouded by what we thought we knew before.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It might lead to a more realistic reappraisal of a situation, a kind of mental reset.
Okay, and the second function?
The second key function is that sadness signals to others that we need support. It's a social signal.
Oh.
It can elicit empathy and helpful behavior from those around us. Think about it. When you see someone who's clearly sad, you often feel an urge to help, right?
Yeah, you do.
So we might become more cooperative. We might express our need for help more clearly, physically or verbally. Even our posture and facial expressions communicate distress.
And that helps build bonds.
It certainly can. Interestingly, experiencing sadness within a group, like after a shared loss, can sometimes decrease emotional polarization and actually foster stronger connections within that group. So here we see that connecting function of sadness really emerging.
That's a powerful idea that our vulnerability, when expressed as sadness, can actually draw people closer instead of pushing them away.
It's one of its key social roles.
So when we feel sad, how do we typically try to cope with it? People react differently, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Coping mechanisms are very personal and very varied. But importantly, sadness itself can actually motivate us to take action, to try and address the situation that's causing it.
So it's not always paralyzing.
Not always, no. Some common ways people cope include seeking comfort and support from friends, family, partners, even pets can be a huge source of comfort.
Yeah.
Some people find making lists helpful just to feel a bit more in control, or engaging in activities that allow them to express their sadness, like journaling, art, listening to particular kinds of music.
And some people withdraw.
Yes. Others might withdraw socially for a while, needing time alone to process their feelings and recover. That can be perfectly healthy too.
But I guess some coping strategies can be less helpful in the long run, can't they?
Absolutely. While it's totally natural to want to escape the pain of sadness, some strategies can actually prolong it or even make things worse.
Like what?
Well, things like excessive rumination, just getting stuck in those negative thought loops, going over and over the problem without finding solutions, or trying to numb the pain, drowning one's sorrows with alcohol or other substances, or completely isolating oneself long term. These tend to be counterproductive.
So what are some healthier alternatives?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, offers some useful strategies. Things like learning to identify and challenge those negative thought patterns. And also consciously scheduling positive or pleasant activities, even small ones, to help counteract the inertia of sadness.
And maybe just allowing ourselves to feel it sometimes. Is there value in just being with the sadness?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot to be said for allowing ourselves to simply experience sadness, especially if we have emotional support from others while we do. It doesn't mean wallowing, but rather staying with the feeling.
And that can lead to.
It can lead to insights, maybe gained through that period of reflection or solitude. And often, after processing the loss or disappointment, there can be a renewed sense of aliveness or re-engagement with the world.
It really resonates. Okay, this next point is quite fascinating. Pupil empathy. How does the size of our pupils relate to seeing sadness in others?
Yeah, this is really subtle but quite powerful. Research has found a link. When we look at a sad facial expression, if that face has smaller pupils, we tend to judge that sadness as being more intense.
Okay, smaller pupils equal more sadness perceived.
Seems so. But what's really interesting is that our own pupils can subtly mirror this. When we view those sad faces with small pupils, our own pupils tend to constrict slightly.
Wow.
And this mirroring effect doesn't seem to happen, or at least not in the same way, when we look at neutral, happy, or angry expressions. It's specific to sadness with small pupils.
That's incredible. It's like our eyes are having a silent emotional conversation.
You could almost say that, yeah. And what's more, the degree to which our pupils mirror the sadness in another person's face has been linked to empathy.
How so?
Greater pupil mirroring tends to correlate with higher scores on empathy questionnaires. It suggests this physiological mimicry is part of how we connect with and understand others' sadness.
Amazing.
And it might also have implications for understanding social interactions in conditions where interpreting emotional cues can be tricky, like perhaps autism or psychopathy, suggesting these very subtle, nonverbal, non-linguistic cues play a real role in empathy.
So even without spoken words, our bodies are responding and connecting. What about the sound of sadness? Our sources mention how sadness is expressed vocally.
Yes, sadness definitely has a distinct acoustic profile. Our speech recognition systems and just our ears can often pick it up. Researchers analyze things like the overall energy or loudness of the voice, the RMS energy.
Okay.
Also, the pauses between words, interword silence tends to increase, and the overall speaking rate usually slows down.
Right. That makes intuitive sense.
And vocally, sadness is often conveyed through a lowering of the average pitch, the fundamental frequency, and also less variation in pitch, a more monotonous tone. Vocal intensity or volume tends to be lower too, and there's often a decrease in the fundamental frequency over the course of an utterance, like the voice is trailing off downwards.
So the stereotypical slow, low voice we associate with sadness is actually backed by acoustic science.
Pretty much, yeah. It's been described as a slow, low-pitched speech with weak, high audio frequency energy. Yeah. But interestingly, the researcher Klaus Scherer found that sadness is actually one of the most easily recognized emotions in the human voice across cultures.
Really? Even more than anger or happiness sometimes.
Well, maybe not more than happiness or anger, but it's up there. Although recognition accuracy is generally slightly lower for vocal cues compared to facial expressions, but it's still pretty well recognized. It just shows how multifaceted our emotional communication really is: face, voice, body language.
It's amazing how many different channels we use. Now, let's zoom out a bit. How has sadness been viewed across different cultures and maybe throughout history? It hasn't always been seen just negatively, has it?
No, not at all. The sources provide some really intriguing examples. If you look back at the Renaissance, for instance, the poet Edmund Spenser, in his epic poem The Faerie Queene, actually portrayed sadness not as a weakness, but almost as a marker of spiritual devotion and commitment.
Wow, that's a completely different take from how we often view it today, isn't it? As something to overcome quickly.
It's a fascinating contrast. And think about literature like J.R.R. Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. He seemed to draw a distinction between sadness and unhappiness.
How so?
He appeared to value a kind of deep, enduring, almost noble sadness, the kind that comes from accepting loss and hardship, but carrying on with a sort of settled determination. It's different from a fleeting or perhaps self-pitying unhappiness.
So a more grounded, maybe even stronger form of sadness, like Aragorn sadness, perhaps?
Precisely, a sad but settled determination. And then you have thinkers like the philosopher and psychoanalyst Julia Kristeva. She suggested that the ability to experience a diverse range of sad moods, a kind of refinement in sadness and sorrow, is actually a mark of a subtle, resilient, and creative human spirit.
So not about being happy all the time, but having the capacity for the full spectrum of emotional experience, including the nuances of sadness.
Exactly that. It suggests depth, resilience, creativity.
It really seems like across different times and cultures, there's been this recognition of a deeper value or meaning to sadness, beyond just it being a negative feeling to avoid.
Absolutely. Which brings us right back to our central idea for today, that sadness, while it's often painful, is truly a fundamental human emotion that connects us.
How so? Bringing it all together.
Well, we all experience loss, disappointment, grief in different ways at different times. It's universal. And this shared experience is part of what binds us together as humans.
And the functions we talked about.
Exactly. As we discussed, its function in eliciting social support is so crucial. It helps build relationships. It fosters empathy. It can potentially even bridge divides between people or strengthen bonds within a group facing adversity together.
So it truly does circle back to our title. Sadness, the emotion that connects us all. It's not just about individual suffering. It's woven into the fabric of our shared humanity.
Precisely. It's a reminder that we aren't alone in our struggles, and that acknowledging and supporting sadness, both in ourselves and, crucially, in others, is a vital part of what it means to be human, to be connected.
Thank you so much for this incredibly insightful exploration of sadness. It's definitely shifted my perspective on it.
My pleasure. It's a topic with so much depth, really.
It really is. Okay, here's a final thought for you, the listener. Think about your own experiences with sadness. How might understanding its different facets, from its neurological basis to its social functions, how might that change how you view this emotion in yourself or others? And maybe consider the societal pressure we often feel to always be happy, always be positive. Is there perhaps a valuable, even necessary space for sadness in our lives and in our connections with each other? Something to mull over. Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help more listeners reach our content. Thank you and have an amazing day.